So it's right at 4, and I know we'll probably have some people come in still late and everything, but I know that we want to get talking, and we want to, I mean, we're here to talk about Camellia. So welcome everybody. That's my cat. Welcome everybody. My name is Taylor Clem with IFAS Extension in Alachua County. And today's program, we have one of Alachua County's Master Gardener volunteers, Ron Stevens, and he is going to be doing a whole presentation that we're calling For the Love of Camellias. Ron is one of our master gardeners that just has a passion for camellias and specializes in them. So, you know, right now is the prime time to start thinking about camellias in your garden and your landscape. So this is a great program for us to have, and who doesn't love camellias? So I like to hand it over. Well, first off, some housekeeping. I apologize. The Master Gardener volunteers are all available for you. So feel free throughout the presentation. At the bottom of your screen, there is the Q&A box. Go ahead and type your questions in there, and we can respond to your questions so everyone can see them. And you know, we'll still have some time at the end for any Q&A. And as part of security, that what we do with the webinars is you have the inability to share your camera or your microphone. So that Q&A box is going to be the best way to interact with the panelists to help answer those questions throughout the program. And if any of the questions come up and it works out with timing with what Ron is speaking about, we'll try to interject that with him so he can answer that live. But anyway, so use that Q&A box to put in any questions that you have. But and then we're recording this webinar, so we'll post it up on our YouTube page that we have. So you'll have, and we'll send it out, the link out through email to everyone that's registered, so you can always come back and view this at another time, in addition to any other webinars that we have posted online. But anyways, I'd like to, you know, stop talking and I would like to hand this over to Ron, because I know that we're all anxiously waiting to hear about camellias. So Ron, take it away. Thank you.
You're welcome, Taylor. Happy to be here today and share my enthusiasm about camellias for anybody else who's interested. The goals of this presentation, taking into consideration Gainesville and Alachua County, Florida, the goal is to introduce camellias to those who are not familiar with them, and ultimately leave everybody with the ability to select, site, plant, and care for the camellia of their choice. My camellia background: I'm a current member of the Gainesville Camellia Society and the American Camellia Society. I've been growing camellias for more than 40 years. At the moment, I have 60 camellias in the ground at my 1-acre property here on Southwest Gainesville, and I'm currently having difficulty answering the question, how many camellias are enough? My wife is letting me know that. My first camellia, in 1978, I went to Huntington Botanical Gardens spring plant sale in San Marino, California. And I was looking for something to plant on the north side of my house, and I thought maybe camellias might do the job. So the Camellia Society of Southern California had a booth set up at the plant sale, and I went up to the booth and I asked the fellow there, can you suggest a nice red camellia? And they had about 2,000 small camellias in 3-inch pots. And he said, you know, why don't you go with Wildfire? You know, that's a good one. It's a good red one. And so Wildfire was my first camellia that I ever purchased. And it turned out to be a nice one. And here's Wildfire. It's a real beauty. It was in the ground for just about 20 years when I left the house that I was living with at the time. Beautiful color, Camellia japonica. That was my first camellia, and then I added 4 more to it. And these 4, coupled with Wildfire, made my first little camellia garden. And I'm still kind of partial to these 4 camellias. I don't have them all in my current garden, but I do have Jordan's Pride and Bob Hope. They're both outstanding camellias, and so is Mrs. Tingley, Glen 40 as well. Camellias really are ancient plants. There are thousands of varieties that have been bred in recent years, in the last 100 years, but they exist in fossil form, specimens that are over 30 million years old. Specimens can be found in China, of course, and Bulgaria, Kings County, Washington State. I guess back in prehistoric times, they were spread over the huge continent that existed at the time, and we had remnants growing. The camellia has always been a very important plant in China and Japan especially, and is represented in Chinese art and pottery for years and years. They truly are beloved plants in China and Japan. And camellias are a member of the family Tiaceae, the tea family. Tiaceae consists of about 40 genera of trees and shrubs native to tropical and temperate regions around the world. Most are, but not all of these are native to China and East Asia. We have some representatives of the Camellia family here in the United States. I didn't include them in this presentation, but there's several that are quite nice and distinctive plants. Tea is made from the leaves of a species of camellia, Camellia sinensis. And it's believed that the Chinese began breeding camellias more than 1,000 years ago. And it's suspected that the breeding was probably most associated with efforts to produce superior plants for making tea. I have to shift over to my other computer where I've got my notes. I can't see my notes on the main screen, but according to Chinese legend, the history of drinking tea began around 2737 BC, when Emperor Shen Nong accidentally discovered tea. He was supposedly boiling water when a leaf from a wild camellia fell and drifted into his pot. The emperor enjoyed the flavor of the water, and a new tradition was born. So, counting down from 2737 to 2020, people have been drinking tea now for 4,757 years. That's got to be a lot of tea, believe me. Who knows whether the legend is true or not, but ancient records in China, it's amazing that they exist. And the Chinese people are awesome keeping all of those old records. Camellia sinensis, here's a beautiful picture of a Camellia sinensis, the tea plant. It grows well in Gainesville, kind of has a weeping habit, bushy, some attractive shrub, nothing outstanding, but pretty with a small white flower, delicate white flower. It's worth planting in your yard, and you can make tea from it if you want to do a little research on the internet and see how it's done. And if you'd like to try it, well, there's a lot of information out there on how it's done. Camellias are native to Southern and Eastern Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Laos, Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, and all these islands associated with these countries. The majority of Camellia species do grow in China. But in today's world, camellias are grown everywhere. Wherever climate provides opportunity, people are growing camellias. Here's a typical growing range of camellias in the United States, the gray area. And you can see we can grow camellias, wow, just probably at least a third of the United States. They're supposed to, they're grown from, camellia will grow in a range of from USDA zone 7 through 10. You see down here, it's a little whited out on the tip of Florida down there where it gets a lot of tropical sun and alkaline soil. They don't grow that well down there, but they can be grown, and they'll grow on up through Virginia and up through Washington, D.C. The northern limits of Camellia range, Washington, D.C. is about the northern limit. Zone 7A, in the hard freeze, then in 1977-78, temperatures dropped to minus 17 degrees at the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C., and that's in Zone 7A. And all but 15 camellias out of a collection of 956 plants were lost. Dr. William Ackerman, he's a horticulturist in charge of the camellia gardens at the time, then began a camellia breeding program using the 15 survivors as breeding stock, crossing these camellias with Camellia japonicas and other camellia species. He eventually developed more than 50 attractive camellia varieties that will survive in USDA Zone 6B. So his work has been instrumental in getting camellias to grow in areas that previously they couldn't be grown. Some camellias have a natural ability to withstand cold. Here's one of them, Korean fire. It was collected from a very cold area in Korea and is grown and will take temperatures down to 0. It's a beautiful little small 2.5-inch flower, very attractive, simple form, somewhat cup shaped, a real beauty. I got to add this one to my collection. Southern limits of camellia growing. As you can see, when you get up in the Washington, D.C. area, up in 7, temperatures can get down to 10 degrees. And so camellias that have been grown to withstand, crossbred to withstand that type of temperature, they got to be tough, because if they had minus 17 degree once, they can have it again. And some of these camellias have been tested to tolerate minus 23. So, but we don't have to worry about that in Florida. The bottom line is, here in Gainesville and Alachua County, we are located in prime camellia country. And camellias thrive here, and we're lucky to have the option of growing them in our gardens. When I lived in California, I could grow them, but if I cut back on the water, it was all over for anything growing on my property from the camellia family. But here in the South and in Florida, I mean, I'm sure you could probably plant a camellia, get it established, walk away from it, come back in 50 years, and chances are it'll still be growing. Camellia species, although there is disagreement among plant taxonomists, Mark, you can relate to this, and when is there not? It's generally accepted that there are about 150 to 200 species of genus Camellia. Of course, that's up for argument, depending on who you talk to. But of all these species, only 3 are really of any importance to the average home gardener. Camellia japonica, Camellia sasanqua, and to a lesser extent, Camellia reticulata, and the hybrids between these 3. Camellia japonica is, matter of fact, here's a beautiful variety called Louise Fitzgerald. Japonicas are the most available species in nurseries, and the flowers vary in presentation, form, and size. The trees themselves are They vary in growth habit, density, leaf color, weight of growth, and other things. Typically, Camellia japonicas have larger leaves and flowers than Camellia sasanquas. And they tend to bloom later than Camellia sasanquas. They also prefer to be planted in filtered sunlight and do not thrive in full sun. They will survive in full sun, but they won't thrive in full sun. And occasionally you'll get, I've had members of the Camellia Society tell me that you can take you can plant a Camellia japonica, get it well established, and then lose the shade cover that was over top of it. And this usually happens when an oak tree falls. And all of a sudden you've got established camellias that are suddenly exposed to full sun. And they'll sunburn right off the bat. They'll take a hit and they'll yellow up. But the old timers tell me that if you give them 3 years to acclimate, that they will acclimate and begin to look attractive again. I don't have this, I don't know this from personal experience because I haven't had this happen to me, but I do have 2 Camellia japonicas on my property that when I bought my property, it had 23 camellias on it. And I've identified probably about 15 of them. But I had 2 japonicas growing beside of my house that are good size now, about 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide. But every summer when the sun is hot, they do a little scald, they get scalded a little bit, and they tend to be a little bit yellowy. They do survive though, and they're getting plenty of water and they're getting taken care of, but they don't look like they're happy. I've also got 2 camellias. One of them is called this particular hybrid camellia. It's a Japonica saloensis hybrid called High Fragrance. It smells awesome. It smells like a gardenia. It's really a beauty. And I have one planted in semi-shade, and I had one that was planted underneath a pear tree that grew old and brittle, and I had to take it out. And when I took it out and that camellia got exposed to full sun, it's yellowed up quite a bit. The difference between the 2 is pretty striking. One in the filtered sun is beautiful and green and gorgeous looking. The one in the sun at this point in time is still pretty yellowy and not very happy looking. Will it survive? Yeah, I'll leave it in and I'll give it another couple of years, and because it's a good sized camellia now, so I'm going to leave it in place. I'll give it 2 or 3 years. If it doesn't improve in appearance, then I'll graft it over to something else. Camellia sasanquas tolerate full sun. Okay. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this because I lost track getting on my story, but Camellia sasanquas are fall blooming in small trees. They're shrubs and small trees. Typically, they bloom in the camellia early season from October through Christmas. They have smaller leaves and flowers than their Camellia japonica brothers, and they typically bloom more profusely. They also tend to be more open and lacy in habit, and their impact on the landscape is less bold. They will tolerate full sun, and they'll do well in shade and filtered sunlight as well. They're quite often used in hybridizing efforts to breed camellias that will take more sun. Camellia reticulatas, they're a little bit hard to find. You can find them. Certain nurseries will carry a few of them. I think Gainesville has one nursery that will carry a couple, and that nursery is Garden Gate Nursery, and they'll at least have 3 or 4 in stock when they get their camellias in, typically in middle to late part of November when they bring their stock in. Reticulatas are open, loosely branched shrubs and small trees that can eventually reach up to 35 feet. The flowers are large and very showy, larger than the japonica typically. And they're more sun tolerant than Camellia japonica. You can plant them in full sun. This summer I was in Massey Lane, the head of the Camellia Society in Fort Valley, Georgia, and they have a Camellia sun garden where they're testing various varieties of camellias for their sun tolerance. And they had several Camellia reticulatas there that looked just absolutely outstanding, planted in full sun. The japonicas, they were looking decent enough, but they didn't look like they were super happy. They were surviving well, but they didn't look like they were thriving. Camellia reticulatas make beautiful specimen trees. They eventually get up to be, I mean, you're talking 20 or 30 years, they'll get up 35 feet tall with a nice crown. They're gorgeous trees. I've seen huge ones growing in Descanso Gardens in California and Huntington Botanical Gardens in California as well. And they are gorgeous trees that work beautiful as showpieces in a yard if you got a spot for one. There are many cultivars, but typically there are about 50 cultivars available in the United States at any given time. You can buy them online. There are several sites that carry them. One site in particular, Nuccio's Nursery in Altadena, California. It's a mail order camellia nursery. You can buy quite a few different varieties of Camellia reticulatas. Hybrid camellias. The reasons for hybridizing camellias, there are lots of reasons. Cold tolerance is one that's been done for quite a while. Early experiments with breeding cold tolerance camellias was done in Great Britain by a gentleman named John Williams. Created a line of camellias crossing Camellia japonica with Camellia saluensis, and he created a group of camellia hybrids that are typically referred to as Camellia cross Williamsi. They're beautiful, they're floriferous. They don't always, all of those particular varieties of Camellia Williamsi don't necessarily thrive in the southern states, but a lot of them do. So if you find one that you think you might like to have, go online, do a little research, and see if you can find it. It grows well in our gardens here in Gainesville. Another reason for breeding camellias is sun tolerance. You know, if you have a Camellia japonica that you particularly like the flower of, and it won't tolerate full sun, you can cross it with Camellia reticulata or Camellia sasanqua. You know, if you cross it with reticulata, you'll probably get a large flower with better sun tolerance. If you cross it with Camellia sasanqua, you might get a smaller flower, or a camellia with a smaller leaf. But you also may get something unique that will tolerate more sun than the Camellia japonica you started with. Of course, breeding for flower color is an important thing. For years and years and years, people have been experimenting, trying to grow a purple camellia and a yellow camellia. The purple camellia, they haven't created a purple camellia yet. They've got some deep red camellias and dark red camellias and camellias with purple highlights, but yet they haven't gotten a true purple camellia. And maybe it'll happen one day, but it's something still being worked on. And camellia breeders are trying to breed a yellow camellia as well. And there are several beautiful yellow camellias, who are quite often native to Vietnam and Thailand in that area, like Camellia nitidissima is a species of camellia that has a beautiful canary yellow, small canary yellow flower. I have one in my garden that's doing well, and it's an absolute beauty. They're using that to cross with other camellias to try to create a yellow flowered camellia, and it's some successes. You know, there are some cultivars that have a yellowy color to them, you know, but as of yet, they haven't gotten a truly nice yellow camellia cultivar at this point in time. But it takes a long time to breed and backbreed and create a camellia. And when you do create one and get a seed, plant that seed, it's going to take up to 7 years for it to flower. So you can see you don't have that many years in a lifetime to breed camellias. If you're going to start from a seed cycle and crossbreed and continue that, well, you've got to pass on your research to somebody else, because the chances are it's going to take longer than the average person's going to live. Sometimes there's a wonderful surprise, though. So let's hope that on the horizon there might be some type of a breakthrough. Also, camellias are bred with the idea of creating small shrubs that do well and are not so imposing in the garden. There are quite a few varieties available now. I have several in the yard here. One quite common one and very, very beautiful one is called Shishigashira. That's pretty much everywhere. You can buy that in every Home Depot and Walmart in town, you know, but it is a beauty, and it stays small and not so domineering in the landscape, and also a very, very beautiful tree. Camellias are also bred for form and structure. You know, you can create, you can take a Camellia japonica, cross it with a Camellia reticulata, and you're going to get a more open growing tree with a different form altogether. If what you'd like to do is create something with an open habit, that's an avenue you could follow. Of course, everybody is always trying to create the perfect camellia. And of course, the idea of a perfect camellia is in the mind of the person looking at that camellia. But there's always a desire for something new and different. And you never know what you're going to get. I've got 25 or 30 seedlings in pots growing around the house that I grew from random crosses. Who knows what they'll turn out to be? I'm getting up there in age now, so I hope I'm around 7 years from now when they start to flower. We'll see. I do have one that's getting ready, that's blooming for the first time this year, so I'm excited about that. It's a seedling from my beautiful red Camellia japonica that's very gorgeous, called Don Mac. So we'll see what that does. I'm hoping it'll be a little different from the parent. Even if it isn't, it'll find a place in my yard somewhere, and it'll be the first camellia that I ever grew from seed. This is a beautiful cross, a Camellia reticulata japonica hybrid cross called Frank Hauser. This is considered by most camellia lovers, especially the serious folks who love to go to camellia shows, and this is probably the most award-winning camellia that ever entered into a camellia show. The flowers are about 5 to 6 inches wide. They are absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful hybrid. And I do have one in the yard. It's about 7 feet tall, open, gangly. Probably won't look like anything special until long after I'm gone, but I'll pass it on to the next person who moves into my house when I leave. Camellia bloom seasons. Camellias bloom over 3 different seasons, really. They're referred to as early season, mid-season, and late. Early season camellias bloom from October to Christmas typically. I've probably got a half a dozen, maybe 8 or 9 blooming right now at my house. The early blooming varieties are typically Camellias sasanquas. Occasionally there are early blooming Camellia japonicas, and I've got several of those blooming right now. This is early for Camellia japonicas to bloom, but I do have a beautiful variety called Marie Bracy that bloomed the first flower on the 15th of November, and it's an absolute beauty. Several others. So if you want an early blooming Camellia japonica, there are several that you can choose from. Mid-season camellias, typically this is December through March. This is going to be mostly your Camellia japonicas. This is prime bloom time for them. And japonicas will continue to bloom on through what's referred to as the late season. That's typically from March to May. And you'll get stragglers. You'll get stragglers blooming deep into May. Some of the varieties don't even start blooming until April, really. And it tends to vary from year to year, from plant to plant. The Camellia Marie Bracy, the Japonica Marie Bracy that bloomed for me this year, the first bloom was in November the 15th. That has not yet started to bloom at Kanapaha yet. So I think microclimate has some influence on bloom. I brought this young camellia on the property. It came from somewhere else. It came from Georgia, as a matter of fact. So their climate, microclimate there is going to be a little different. So we'll see how it settles in.
Hey, Ron,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So when we're thinking about bloom time and the varieties that we select for our landscape, do we need to concern ourselves with like the late blooms and then maybe some of our warming temperatures that we start to get in that as we start to warm up in that post-April period?
If you plant, the heat isn't a problem if you have filtered sunlight, or if you have morning sun with afternoon shade or afternoon filtered sun. Those are ideal conditions, and you don't have to worry about heat. Of course, you got to keep them well watered, and especially if they're young. But if you do plant a japonica in marginal territory, it's going to discolor a little bit in full sun. But if you're considering planting several camellias, it's nice, in my opinion, to plant camellias in groups that highlight one another in color, compatibility, and also in bloom time. So if you can have two nice rose-colored camellias growing in a group of 3, and then plant a beautiful pink camellia in the middle of that to highlight it, and you have them all 3 blooming at the same time, it makes quite a show. If you plant 3 different varieties that vary in form, in shape, in color, in bloom season, well, the impact you get will just be one camellia typically. You might get a little overlap, but what you see is not going to be typically as striking. But if your goal is to have camellias blooming in odd seasons, different seasons, then that might be something you'd want to consider.
Perfect. Thank you.
Some camellias bloom for several weeks. Typically, the average camellia, you're going to get at least 3 weeks of bloom. 3 weeks to a month. But some varieties bloom for a long time. They typically have a prime bloom time, and then they bloom off and on intermittently for months. Some bloom 4 or 5 months. Typically, Camellias sasanquas bloom first, and that's mainly what I've got blooming right now. I've got every variety of Camellia sasanqua that I've got, which is probably 7 or 8 varieties, they're all just starting to bloom. Some of them have bloomed or well into their bloom season. Most of them are just starting to bloom. I do have about 4 or 5 Camellia japonicas just starting to bloom. I have 2 reticulatas and hybrids in the ground. The buds are starting to swell, but no blooms for those yet. They'll typically bloom probably around February. That's usually a season when reticulatas start to bloom in February, around that area. The hybrids, the bloom season is going to vary depending on which variety of Camellia the hybrid takes after. So if you crossbreed a sasanqua with a reticulata, it's not necessarily going to bloom early, and it's not necessarily going to have the characteristics of a sasanqua, and vice versa. So you never really know what you're going to get. Camellia pH preferences. Camellias prefer a soil pH of around 5.5 to 6.8. Here in Gainesville, our average soil pH is 5.7, which is mildly acidic. But soils in Gainesville range from a highly acidic 3.6 to a mildly alkaline 7.8. pH values are lowest in the forested and residential areas of North and East Gainesville. And pH values are highest in the south and west parts of Gainesville, where I live. You can check out an easy way to just check out your neighborhoods and the areas that surround you. If you have neighbors growing camellias and they look happy, then I wouldn't be too concerned about pH. If you're curious and you'd like to find out what your soil pH is, you can check out the website I've got listed here. And through the IFAS Extension Soil Testing Lab, they'll test your soil for you, and you know exactly what kind of soil you have. Camellias here on my property, they seem to be doing well. I've got a lot of clay with an overlay of about 1 foot of topsoil. My camellias looking happy if they're sited in an area where they're getting filtered sun. So I haven't had my soil tested. I probably should do it one of these days, just out of curiosity. But so far I haven't had any problems, so it hasn't been something I've been too concerned about. There are many considerations when planting camellia. You know, you just don't buy it and stick it in the ground, and I've done a lot of that. But if you're smart, you'll consider some things along the line of landscape compatibility. If you plant this camellia, you know, how is it going to look in 20 years? Is it going to fit into your landscape? Is it going to, I don't know how many times I've seen people plant a queen palm in the front yard of a tract home, and then 15 years later, it's outgrown the landscape. Well, that happens with camellias too. They look, when you plant them and get them out of a 3-gallon pot, they're small and they look beautiful, but in 20 years time, they're going to be sizable trees. We're talking 15 feet tall, 8 to 10 feet wide. It varies on the variety and the characteristics of the plant, but you should, if you see a camellia that you like and you fall in love with it, go online to the American Camellia Society, and I'll have some information on that later on in this program, or go to a couple of sites that will give you information about what this camellia is going to grow like. What is its growth habit? Is it open? Is it dense? Are the leaves dark green? Are the leaves sizable? The leaves have a well-defined serrate edge? There's all kinds of variables. So I'd find the camellia that caught my eye, and I'd look it up and see what it's going to look like in 20 years, and I consider that when I planted it. You also would want to consider the sun-shade environment you put it in. What is it? A japonica? Is it a reticulata or Sasanqua, what can I get away with when I plant it? Consider the soil type you have. I've got some areas on my property that don't drain well due to the clay that I've got. It rains, the rain settles into the soil, it hits that clay and it starts to run off. And I've got some areas, low areas in my property that stay wet all summer. So those are areas that are going to be marginal for planting Camellia japonicas. I just got together with a neighbor not too long ago and talked him into letting me make a camellia garden out of the section of property between our houses that's had various types of plants over the years. And so when I went digging this property, I found that the water table was really high. So right away, that took out of consideration most of the Camellia japonicas that I was going to plant in that area. Camellia sasanquas will take a little more water, so I kind of moved to Camellia sasanquas and Camellia sasanqua hybrids that I know from the Camellia Society and personal experience will take a little more moist area. However, this garden area that I planted, it may turn out to be beautiful or it may turn out to be too wet for anything to thrive. So far, so good. I planted a few japonicas in marginal areas. We'll see how they do. And I'm expecting that the sasanquas will do well, but we'll see what happens. If the japonicas don't make it, then I'll replace them with sasanquas or sasanqua hybrids. Also, you consider when you plant that camellia, is it part of a plan or is it a single statement tree? Is it a specimen tree you want to plant in your front yard? Are you picking a prime spot where you'd like to have an outstanding tree bloom? In that case, you might want to consider a Camellia reticulata. But these are things you could consider. If you don't want to bother with this stuff, if you just buy a camellia from any store that has a pretty bloom and you plant it in an area that has semi-shade, it's probably going to do well, and it's not going to be a big deal one way or another, but it is nice to follow a plan. I've always been guilty of letting my enthusiasm overwhelm my planning, but hopefully other people out there will be better at that than I have been. Other considerations, the beauty of flower. Okay, people typically choose camellias because of the beauty of the flower. I mean, that's the way it's usually done. A person goes in a nursery, they see a beautiful flower and they say, I gotta have that. And they take it home and plant it. If you don't like it, you're not going to plant it. So first of all, that's probably your first consideration. You don't want to buy something unknown on sale because it doesn't have a tag, unless you just want to roll the dice. If you want to know what it is and how it's going to grow, then you should take that into consideration. Like I talked about earlier, bloom season and duration of bloom is something that you should consider. And I personally think that if you're going to choose a camellia and you're only going to have one or two in your yard, choose one that's going to give you a long bloom season. It's going to start blooming in the middle of November and bloom through March or April. They're out there and they're beautiful. So if you got a beautiful camellia that's going to bloom for 3 weeks to a month, and you've got one that's going to bloom for 5 months, well, I know which direction I'm going to lean, and that's something you can consider. Like I was mentioning a little early, it's nice to group camellias by their bloom season, and knowing if they're early, mid-season, or late is going to give you an idea of when they're going to start to flower and how long they're going to flower. Also, growth habit. Some camellias are upright, some are spreading, some of them are dense, some are quite open growing. Each one of those aspects is going to have an influence on the area where you plant it. If you want something graceful and weeping, there are varieties out there that are similar to that as well. If you want a small tree, small, graceful, somewhat open tree, there are many nice Camellias sasanquas that fill that bill. Also leaves. Some Camellia leaves are very large and bold, like there are various japonicas with quite large leaves that are very striking. Others have very small leaves. Some leaves are light, some are dark, some are leathery, some are quite fine. And each one of these trees, when it's in the ground and gets up to be good size, is going to have a different appearance. So it's nice to know what this tree is going to look like when you plant it. Okay, here's confessions that I have to make. I've made many Camellia errors in the past, not just Camellias, but many errors. And I'm sure that everybody else can relate to the wrong tree in the wrong place. I've done that many a time. Also proportions, planting something that looks nice now and not knowing what's going to look like in 20 years, you're going to be surprised. Is it still going to fit in your yard in 20 years? Is it going to block the view of your house in 20 years? This is one that I call the hodgepodge syndrome, where enthusiasm trumps everything else. I am guilty of that. I'm fighting hard to not be as guilty of it as I used to be. But the 65 Camellias or so that I've got growing in my yard right now, there's probably a few of them in there that could fall into the hodgepodge syndrome. Overdoing it, one of everything. Okay, I have a lot of Camellia buddies in the Camellia Society that absolutely have Camellia botanical gardens, and that's great. You can never get enough Camellias. If you're a huge fan of Camellias, I know guys with hundreds of Camellias and on acres of property, and they are beautiful, and it's almost like a botanical garden. And it's a wonderful thing, but the average homeowner, I think there is such a thing as overdoing it. I'm trying to keep from getting to the point where I'm overdoing it, and I'm fighting it, but maybe my wife would disagree with that, but I'm doing my best. One of the things you never want to do, and I'm guilty of this, and I have done it, don't plant a Camellia too close to the front or back of your house, especially if under the eaves. I've seen it many, many times, and I've done it when I planted my first Camellia garden. I planted the Camellias in front of my house about 3 feet away from the front of the house under a soffit. Well, in a period of time, in 8 to 10 years, those Camellias are going to outgrow that area. And then you got a problem on your hands. Then you have to constantly cut them back, and they become a problem. They get too large. It's not a good idea to plant a Camellia in the front of your house or behind your house under a soffit or roof overhang. On the side of your house, if there's not a soffit involved, you can plant Camellias 5 or 6 feet away from your house. They'll grow up the side of your house, touch the side of your house, and it won't be a problem. But avoid planting them right in the front of your house under a roof overhang. Okay, Camellia flowers they vary a lot in terms of form, color, and size, scent, texture. Duration on the bush. Some Camellias will bloom and they'll stay beautiful on the bush for 5 to 6 days. Others will last a couple of days and then they'll fall off. Also, the length of bloom season varies. How long are they going to produce those flowers? It does pay to research the plant you're about to buy and learn about its growth characteristics. There are many forms of Camellia flowers. Here's a few of them. Taylor, here's your formal double. It's a beauty. Loose peony form. Formal doubles are gorgeous, very formal looking flowers. They traditionally don't produce stamens, so you have no yellow stamens in the middle, and they're usually sterile. Loose peony form, rose form. Many varieties are very similar to rose in color. Single form, like this, very, very attractive Camellia. Yuletide is a very attractive red camellia that blooms at Christmas time. They're everywhere. It's a Camellia sasanqua, japonica hybrid that looks like a sasanqua. So it's usually sold as a Camellia sasanqua, although it's officially a Camellia vernalis. But this is a pink sport of Yuletide, marketed as Pinkaboo, and it's a beautiful small single flower, semi-double, not a formal double, but semi-double, more petals. An enemy form, usually a flattened out group of petals on the side with an enemy form flowers and petals in the middle. They can be very attractive. It's all a matter of personal taste, really. Peony form, a lot of those, open and loose. Rose form double, kind of not quite as formal as the formal double, but kind of a mix between rose form and formal double. Choosing a camellia, where to begin? The American Camellia Society has registered over 2,300 different camellia cultivars, and there are now more than 20,000 named cultivars around the world. How do I ever begin the process of selecting a camellia? There are just too many choices, like this beautiful dark black magic here. The first thing to do is see these camellias in bloom. And to do that, you've got quite a few options. You can visit botanical gardens where camellias are in bloom. You know, Kanapaha Gardens, Wilmot Gardens, an excellent site. Kanapaha, less camellias, but also a beautiful site with established camellias. Lou Gardens up in the Orlando area, Bach Tower Gardens. These are beautiful places. A nice Sunday afternoon outing, couple hours drive. Of course, Kanapaha and Wilmot are local. You can also see camellias at camellia shows, the Gainesville show, the Ocala show, Orlando. The Gainesville show is outstanding. Every year we have the show on the first weekend of the new year.
Hey, Ron, we
yes.
had a question come in. It goes back to the flower types. Is outside of just the flower form, like specifically the rose form and the formal double, are there any like differences between those varieties outside of just the flower type?
No, the plants that produce the flowers, they'll vary in leaf texture and size. You'll get variations in the plants. These are japonicas here, I'm sure, looking at the leaf size. Mm-hmm. So you never know what the plant is going to look like unless you have a particular flower in mind. And then you look it up and you see what the growth characteristics are of the plant, and also you'll see the flower. Mm-hmm. And they'll let you know the bloom season as well. Yeah. And the origin typically, but I'll have some more information on that upcoming to let you know some other opportunities too.
Ron, we are starting to get a little bit close on time, so let's talk about some of those, like those maintenance strategies. You know, because I know you talk a little bit about like fertilizer and pruning and all that stuff. So
I can see that I got a little too carried away here with this, so I'll just move along very quickly. Of course, I talked a little bit about light preferences, so I'll skip there. If you plant a new camellia, At first, it's going to need it's going to pretty much need daily watering, especially in the heat of the summer. You'll consider drainage and weather conditions when you plant it. After a full growing season, you can back off on the water a little bit. Older and mature camellias, they like to be watered once a week with water that's going to penetrate the soil by 16 to 18 inches. Camellias are pretty shallow rooted plants. Fertilization. Okay, this is a big subject, and camellias will survive with no fertilizer, but they do better, according to the American Camellia Society, with a 3 times a year application of a fertilizer that contains an NPK ratio of 12-4-12, 15-5-15. And this is going to be applied with the first application about the 1st of March, second application 1st of May, and the third application the first part of July. This correlates to the growth season for camellias. They start to leaf out and grow about that time of the year. Camellias, they're pretty much dormant between September and March, depending on the variety, but typically at that time of the year they're producing all of their interest is producing flowers and reproducing. So you don't want to use any nitrogen fertilizer on camellias that induce growth during that time of the year. Some camellia growers use time-release fertilizer. I do. It's special. It's a special purchase that I make through the Camellia Society. It can be found online if you're interested in going to the time and trouble. They are very expensive as well, like $50 a bag. It's for a 30-pound bag, but we just fertilize once in April, and then I don't worry about it. Although there's plenty of different opinions on fertilizing camellias. Typically, organic fertilizers, if you're going to go organic, cottonseed meal is probably used more common than any other organic fertilizer. It normally has an NPK ratio of 6:3:1. It'll never burn. If you put it on and it gets too hot, you're not going to worry about burned foliage. It's a great fertilizer. A lot of camellia growers add a little bit of iron and blood meal in a ratio of 4 parts cottonseed meal to 1 part blood meal and 1 part chelated iron. Pruning. Camellias need very little pruning. Broken branches, dead limbs, water, sprouts, suckers, cross branches, awkward branches, and to fill and shape a camellia that has a odd form. If you cut a camellia back, it'll produce new growth. Make sure that growth, you cut above a bud that's going to force growth in the direction you want the growth to go. Camellia propagation, cuttings, grafting, air layering. Cuttings are typically done by large propagating units. If you take a camellia cutting, it's going to take a lot of years for it to produce a flower. Grafting, if you take a rootstock, existing rootstock, and you graft a camellia variety onto that rootstock that you want, that'll flower reasonably quickly. Air layering is a quick way of reproducing camellias for the home gardener. It's easy. Look it up online, nothing to it. Okay, where can I find the camellia I want? Garden Gate Nursery in Gainesville is the best camellia source in the Gainesville area. They stock at least 50 or 60 varieties of Sasanquas, Japonicas, and Reticulatas. Greenhouse Nursery down in Jonesville. They keep about 15 to 20 varieties in stock. Their prices are very reasonable. It's worth a visit. Blooming House Nursery across the street from Greenhouse Nursery, they've got a half a dozen varieties reasonably priced. Blue Star Nursery is a nice nursery out in Hawthorne. It's worth the drive. Most of their camellias come from camellia air layers from the collection of super camellia enthusiasts out in the Hawthorne area. They have some interesting and unusual camellias there, and the prices are quite reasonable. Big box stores, forget it. They have very few camellias there, but occasionally they have some popular varieties, especially the southern livered varieties that are being promoted these days. So it's not a total loss, but almost a total loss. Camellia clubs and societies. If you join a camellia society, you meet a lot of camellia enthusiasts and a lot of camellia experts who know a lot about camellias, and they're willing to share that knowledge with you. They all have private gardens, and they're all always enthusiastic about having people over to look at them. So you can see a lot of camellias blooming in people's private gardens. The Camellia Society shows are awesome places to see camellias, prize-winning camellias, and the camellia sales at these Camellia Society shows are excellent. They offer a lot of different varieties. The Gainesville sale, I think last year we had like 260 different varieties of common, hard to find, and very unusual varieties of camellias. Wilmot Botanical Gardens is a gem. It's a beautiful spot. Camellias are just starting to bloom there. They also have a plant sale every year, and you can order plants, pre-order plants for that sale. I don't know whether they're having it this year or not. The Gainesville Camellia Society show will not take place this year because of COVID. Here's a group of mail order options.
Ron,
I'm not going to take the time to go through these, but these particular nursery sites are available. They sell plant material online. I've ordered from all of these that are listed except the Camellia shop, and I've had good success, good packing, good healthy plants arrive at my house. Okay, real quickly, I listed 10 camellias here that I put together for people who don't want to take the time to research camellias. And these are camellias that are verified performers in Gainesville Gardens. And I say that because last year I did a 6 months evaluation of the camellias growing at Kanapaha Gardens in Gainesville. Every Sunday I went by and I annotated these camellias for first flower, prime flower, bud set, flower duration, beauty of flower, healthy, robust growth, and length of bloom cycle. So I got to see all of these camellias, and some of the camellias stood out as extra special. And so for those folk who don't want to take the time, I've got a list of 10 here that I'm going to run by you. This is Camellia japonica debutante. It's an old variety. It is a very early bloomer. It blooms for 4 months. It's reliable. Some of the old timers say it'll take a little bit more sun than a traditional japonica, and it is an outstanding plant. Camellia japonica Don Mac. Okay, Don Mac is also it goes back to about 1965, I think. A large, healthy red flower, blooming, just starting to bloom right now. My buds are starting to swell and turn color. A long bloom season, 3 to 4 months, an outstanding red color with prominent red stamens. China Dolls is another beauty. There are many camellias that have this form and this type of coloration, but personally I think China Doll is probably the most attractive. It's a japonica as well, and it is just a stunner. Camellia Japana Ecclesfield. This is a hard one to find. I included it because it's such an outstanding white. It can be mail ordered, but you won't find it around in local nurseries. And I don't have this one yet, but I'm going to order it because Nuccio's Nurseries carries it, and I'm going to mail order this one. There are lots of whites out there that are quite stunning. And all you got to do is go online and research white camellias. Go to the American Camellia Society and check out their picture library and look through the camellias and pick out a beautiful white camellia that catches your fancy. This Camellia japonica right here bloomed for 4 months. It was absolutely beautiful. It outbloomed all the other white camellias, probably a dozen of them in Kanapaha. Marie Bracy, this is one of my favorites. It's blooming right now at my house. It's been blooming since November the 15th. Beautiful flower, heavy texture, hangs on the tree for 5 to 6 days, dark green leaf, beautiful oval form, nice and dense, outstanding. This is a camellia that one of my absolute favorites. This is a Sasanqua. I think this is probably the prettiest Sasanqua that grows in Kanapaha. I had my first flower opened a couple of days ago, as a matter of fact. It's a low-growing shrub. It's absolutely outstanding. Pure white. It covers itself with flowers. It drops, flowers shatter and fall, leaving a carpet of white. A stunning small camellia that will never be any more than a shrub. It'll get about 6 to 8 feet tall and just an outstanding Camellia japonica. Professor Sargent is a beautiful oddball. It's been around since, God, way back when, the 25 or 1925, or it's unknown heritage, really. It has these huge flowers that have like 220 petals, deep red, gorgeous leaf. The flowers hang on the tree a long time. When you get a good sized specimen up, maybe 10 feet tall, it actually looks like the tree looks like it's covered with Christmas ornaments. And they hang on for a long time. It's an old, very common, very attractive favorite. And you really can't go wrong if you plant it. And it's very common, can be found just about any nursery that carries camellias will have Professor Sargent. They'll also have Pink Perfection, which is a formal double, small to medium formal double flower. Very old, been in the camellia trade for generations. Your grandma probably had one. It's a beauty and just a beautiful blush pink, lots of flowers. Leaves are a little bit lighter green than some, but an outstanding, stunning camellia. Camellia Sasanqua Pink Snow, its beauty also. It's a seedling from Minata, from the white camellia we just looked at a little early. My Japanese is escaping me right now, but Mini no Yuki Pink Snow is a seedling that was collected from growing underneath pink snow. It has the same habit as the parent, Mini no Yuki, but it has a beautiful pink flower. It's growing at Kanapaha. It is absolutely a stunner. If you're going to grow up, it can be bought. It's not commonly carried, but it can be bought. And it is a beauty. Sandra Williams was bred by, it's a japonica, a variegated japonica, this type of coloration. It was produced by a fellow named Jay Ellis that lives in Keystone Heights, and it's named after Sandra Williams, who's an old member of the Gainesville Camellia Society. This plant bloomed for 5 months last year. It was one of the early blooming varieties at Kanapaha, and it was absolutely covered with these cheerful, small 2.5 inch to 3 inch flowers in the summer at peak bloom, just stunning. And it's another long bloomer that would look nice in any garden. Everybody has a favorite. This one is mine. I don't have it. I'm still looking for it. I had it in California, but it's no longer in the trade. It's a hybrid. Grows grown by a gentleman named Howard Asper, a Reticulatus sasanqua hybrid. And he lived and propagated this in my hometown, which is Escondido, California. And it is no longer in the trade, and I'm guessing that it's not in the trade because it's difficult to propagate. I've tried to propagate it by cuttings. I've tried to graft it 2 or 3 times, and it's just not easy. Camellia reticulata do not air layer well, and so this is on my want list. I'm still looking for it, but so far I haven't been able to get one, but I'm still after it. Old and beautiful, okay. Camellias really are heritage plants. I don't know how old this camellia is. It's got to be up 50 or 60 years old. It looks like it's in a little, this may be somebody's front yard. It's been well cared for. You can tell the lawn has been getting some water. Camellias can live in the right environment for hundreds of years. There are camellias in Japan that are 600 years old, and around the world there are ancient camellias growing. If you do a search on ancient camellias, you'll come up with all kinds of stunning old camellias. This is a beauty right here. So if you plant a camellia in your yard, it can be considered a legacy plant. You can pass it on to the people who live in your house after you're gone, and every year it's going to bloom, and it's going to bloom beautifully for you. And if you take care of it, it's going to give a lot back in return. So if you're looking for a legacy plant, camellia is a choice you should consider. And that's a wrap. If anybody has any questions,
Ron, that was great, man. So,
let me know.
yeah, we do have some questions that came in, and I know you had some additional slides that had to do with some pest, but
Yeah.
we will be sending out copies of your presentation, everybody, as well as our EDIS publication that goes over pest management. But we did have a couple questions pop in already that we kind of saved for the end. One had to go do with the watering. Is there a different watering schedule that you recommend based off of that active growing, like during the summer or warmer time of the year, versus that dormant period in the winter when they're blooming?
Well, if you just have a brand new camellia you put in the ground, in the heat of the summer, you're going to have to water that almost daily. If it doesn't have a well-developed root system, it can dry out really quickly. Once our rainy season starts, that's a different thing altogether. Take that in consideration when you're considering your watering and the type of soil that you have. You know, I have to water less because I've got a lot of clay, but they'll dry out in a hurry if you go 2 or 3 days without watering and it's hot. So older camellias, I mean, I rarely water my older camellias. They're pretty tough plants, really. Once they're established, I don't water them a lot at all. Mm-hmm. I water them maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, my older established camellias.
Yeah, because I think even our IFAS recommendations that like just with the established plants, at most 1 inch per 10 days to every 2 weeks. And in the winter, you can even cut those back to, you can increase it when they're blooming to help prolong the bloom if you want. I think for like 1 inch every week, but that's not necessarily required either. But yeah, once they're well established, I mean, you don't really have to touch them much because they're probably, at least in the rainy season, they're going to get.
And once they're established, they're not finicky at all. They do well with very little water.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we have is someone has a Don Juan, but the buds get brown edges in it. I guess when it starts to get cool. And the Professor Sargents are more of a pinkish color now. Is that more of a nutrient deficiency? Or what do you think is causing that? I know there's more troubleshooting on that one specifically. And we might have to get more input because like our micronutrient deficiencies, like manganese, magnesium, I think, is common with camellias, but you're going to see that in the older growth leaves. What do you do if you're having discoloration happening on your camellias, Ron?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't had any discoloration. I'm trying to find of course, like you say, when you're considering fertilizer, you should buy a fertilizer that has all micronutrients. Also, camellias, folks who show camellias a lot, during the camellia show season, they'll quite often use a fertilizer that has only potassium and phosphorus with no nitrogen. And that's supposedly helps produce flowers with better color and a nicer showing, a show flower.
Mm-hmm.
But from my personal experience, you usually got that dark watermelon red color of Professor Sargent. And it wouldn't surprise me if a little later on in the season, because, my Sargent's really not starting to bloom yet here. So I'd be curious to find out in the prime blooming season of that plant if the color shifts to the normal red color that it is. Mm-hmm. Of course, occasionally you do get a sport. There are sports of Professor Sargent out there. Mary Allen Sargent is one of them, and there'll be variations, but I would, I couldn't put my finger exactly on.
Mm-hmm. Here, we had one question pop up, Ron. Well, one quickly, a different one. Has to do with that pruning, and like the last image that you showed, it was more of a tree form camellia. That's just you're just doing selective pruning on that to give it that form. Is that correct? As it grows and matures.
That was grown from a camellia that was allowed to have 3 trunks when it was young. It wasn't trained as a single trunk. Mm-hmm. It was trained up to be a 3 trunk camellia, and a lot of people favor that form, really. I mean, it's less tree-like. It gives it a little more shrubby appearance to it. Mm-hmm. This is quite a stunner, really. I don't know what variety it is. It's probably an old variety, but it is quite a beauty. And if you want to raise a camellia, a camellia with 3 trunks makes an attractive form. A lot of trees are grown in nurseries and orchards to have 3 leaders, and it's a very pretty form.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just the selective pruning with it.
Your typical camellia is not going to look like this one in 20 years.
That one takes.
This is probably a 50-year-old plant. It wouldn't surprise me.
So what I want to do is I'm putting in a survey, because I know we're running out of time. I'm putting in a link to a survey. I encourage everyone to take that. It allows us to see how we did on this program, as well as improve our programs over time. So please take that survey. The email that we send out, we will also include that link again. It just takes a couple minutes, not much at all. And while people are opening that up, Ron, one question that popped up, and I hear regularly actually, is the picking up petals of camellias that fall on the ground. So like there is that recommendation. Can you explain why that recommendation exists?
Yes, let me find it on my.
That's a good slide right there to talk about it.
That's a good slide, but I have another one that.
Okay.
Because I don't have my notes in front of me. I have it on another computer here that I'm relating to.
Oh,
Okay,
while you're looking that up, someone just asked a question about what do you recommend to put in the hole when planting a camellia under pine trees? So we don't recommend just doing amendments within that backfill. Our own, because usually underneath pine trees you're going to have a pretty decent pH um, for camellias. You may have to do a soil test to determine the pH in case you need to do a soil amendments. But if you just till in compost in the top like 6 to 12 inches of the soil or organic matter, that's gonna, in that entire bed that you're going to plant, that's gonna be great. But a lot of our camellias actually do pretty well in just the soil that we do have. But within the specific hole, but just till in. Sorry, nothing needs to go specifically into the hole that you dig, but we just recommend tilling in prior to planting. So sorry, Ron, that popped up. I want
okay.
to address it while you're looking that up.
Camellia petal blight, it's caused by a fungus pathogen, Siberinia camelliae. It attacks the petals of camellia flowers and turns them progressively brown. And the best way to deal with this is, of course, the fungus is going to release spores. The spores are going to travel. They can travel miles until they land on the proper host. And the best way to deal with this issue, if you get it, you'll quite often notice it on white camellias or light colored camellias. And if you start to see it, it's better to debud the camellias where you see evidence of it, and make sure that you pick up all the camellias that fall from the tree on the ground, because these are the source of the eventually going to release the spores that reinfect. So cultural and sanitation practices are the most effective way to control the problem. Remove all flowers from infected camellias and all flowers that have fallen to the ground. Do not put these flowers in your compost bin and recycle them. Put them in the trash, because you won't get rid of the problem if you put them in your compost bin. Whoops.
Yeah.
Okay, if the situation gets really bad, you can use a fungicide such as Captan or other varieties, and as a soil drench. I have a little bit of this, never had a big problem with it, but I do keep my blossoms picked up, and that's a reason why. Spores to reproduce and travel.
Yeah, and Mark just said that this is typically an issue on our shrubby smaller camellias, and a lot of that, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, is because on the small shrubby camellias that moisture is there, so it allows for that fungus to sporulate and grow. But if you and the splash effect, yeah. So if water hits it, it splashes up. But if you have like the taller camellias that are more tree-like, that air circulation can help dry things out, and then that splash effect. So if water irrigation hits, it's not going to throw the spores up onto the tree or shrub.
Earlier blooming camellias also have less of a problem, and so Camellia sasanquas are not typically affected by it. And the earlier flowering japonicas have less problem with it than others. But I haven't had a real serious problem here at my place. And although I see it around from time to time, I never see it as bad as I see on this slide here. But I do keep mine picked up, and it's a good idea to keep them picked up for that reason.
Yeah, it's an easy best management practice. Absolutely. Well, Ron, I don't think we have any more questions that popped up in here, but I'd like to get the updated version of the PowerPoint as well, since I know that you put those pest slides in there. But I mean,
I'll drop it off to you at work.
Okay, wonderful. But this has been a wonderful presentation and incredibly informative. So I know we've had some people watching on our YouTube, so I'm going to stop streaming there. So thank you, everybody. But I think this has been a wonderful program. Everybody, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me, Taylor Clem, IFAS Extension, Alachua County, and the email that you received, my contact information should be in there. But any questions or comments that you do have, reach out to our county extension office. But if you're looking for any additional information, reach out to your county extension office that you have where you live. I know almost all of you are Alachua County, but we have some from other counties. But feel free to reach out to us. We have amazing resources, and we'll follow up with everybody with additional information, with a copy of the PowerPoint slides, as well as some of our EDIS publications that we have that cover a lot of the information that Ron covered this evening. So Ron, I want to thank you very much for taking your time to put this together. This is a wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.